Welcome back, everyone, to the Aggie Nation Podcast. I'm Alex Miller with the Eagle, joined by colleague Travis L. Brown and one Zachary Taylor. Travis is live from Hoover, Alabama. SEC Media Days wrapping up. Travis, it's talking season, and there's a lot of buzz about the future of the Southeastern Conference with old foes, Texas and Oklahoma, reportedly showing interest in joining the conference. That seemed to be the storyline that kind of stole the show this week. What would you say, Trav?
Yeah, I mean, we went in thinking it was going to be all name, image, likeness, and it really turned out a lot more COVID, and then OU and Texas to the SEC there at the end. A lot of guys were asked today, coaches, players. Most of them said had some jokes and said it was above their pay grade, but a lot of interest in what's going on, and something that seems like there not only is there smoke, but there is a lot of fire too, and this thing could be moving quick. Uh, so yeah, curious to see what things in the conversation are. What you think, Zach?
I think the timing's pretty funny. I really think that this might have come again. Our buddy Uncle Brent Zorneman, a fantastic job yesterday putting this out there. But I think it very well could have come from Texas A&M's camp. I don't know if the timing right before their head coach goes on the stage would have been the best deal. Because then Jimbo Fisher is fielding a bunch of questions that I think Jimbo answered them in the right way. But again, it's kind of taking away from Texas A&M at that point. But whoever had gotten this information out really wanted that to come to the forefront. And now you've got the Big 12 circling the wagons, the rest of the Big 12 minus Oklahoma and Texas trying to figure out what to do. You've got Texas politicians that are taking to social media saying how that they're going to try and put something together to stop this from happening. So it has been just a whirlwind. And I know that we put a lot of focus, and I feel like a lot of A&M fans have put a lot of focus on Texas specifically. But I mean, the fact that Oklahoma is now getting into the mix, and obviously the Sooners have had a lot more success on the football field than the Longhorns have over the last few years. That is really adding some good power there. Now, when you were talking about the power structure, that's another thing that I actually was talking with my co-host this morning on WTAW, the Infomaniacs, and I don't know if Texas is going to be willing to play second fiddle to Alabama. And because it seems like everything that happens in the SEC, Alabama is, in fact, the power broker in that. I don't know if Texas is going to be willing to do that. And so it's an interesting dynamic, or will be an interesting dynamic when, in fact, it happens, if it does. Your thoughts, Alex? I think Travis is a little froze.
Yeah, I think Travis is a little frozen. That's okay. Yeah, I'm kind of along the same lines with you, Zach, of just I'm curious to see how Texas would handle potentially relinquishing some power, whether it's in decision-making, financially. I mean, they have been the driving force of whether it was the Southwest Conference or now the Big 12 Conference for decades. And in the SEC, it's much more of an even playing field. Whether you're Vanderbilt, Alabama, Arkansas, or South Carolina, across the board, it's more of an even playing field, and that's not something that Texas really does. They like to be in control. They've shown that in the past, and they make a lot of more money than their partners in the Big 12. So now, financially, maybe they get more incentive coming to the Southeastern Conference, but are they going to be willing to split the pie a little more evenly, per se, than as they do in the Big 12? And it looks like Travis might still be a little frozen.
Let it go. Let it go.
And now
Don't
I am the host.
Anymore. You are the host. I am the host now. Look at me.
I am the host now.
Well, Travis, I think, got a little ahead of himself because he was talking about how great the Wi-Fi was now at SEC Media Days. And I think he jumped the gun just a little bit, or at least whenever it comes to a live stream. I don't know how well you're able to pull that off. But yeah, when Texas is coming in, they've got all the money. They've got the bravado, so to speak. I feel like they are able to write a lot of checks that, yes, their bank accounts can cash, but their ego can't, or their bodies necessarily can't, their football team can't. And so coming in, will they play well with others? Will they play nicely with others? It hasn't been the case pretty much in every other stop they've been. I mean, you look at the different conferences that Texas has been in and how we've gone along the line and how they've just kind of broken up. And obviously, I think the Longhorns are willing to split up with the Longhorn Network. They're not going to be able to keep that once they come on with the SEC. So they would trade that in a heartbeat. My thinking is, and my wonderment here too, with Oklahoma and Texas, will they have a better shot at making a college football playoff now than they would have previously? Say if things remain at 4. Again, the expansion to 12, not a done deal as far as I know, is not a done deal yet. It looks like it's leaning that way. But, I mean, if things were to stay at 4 teams only, you think Oklahoma or Texas is even going to sniff that Final Four now if they're in the SEC?
Yeah, no. From a championship perspective, aside from the money, if the goal is to win, then Oklahoma has no incentive coming to the SEC because they've had a grasp on the Big 12 for a decade now, and things don't look to be changing anytime soon. If you're Lincoln Riley, you're thinking, why are we leaving? We have the perfect setup. Sure, they haven't gotten over the hump of being in that of getting to the championship game, but they've been in the playoff as much as anybody else has, pretty much. And if the playoff is going to expand to 12 teams, as it looks that way, okay, say Oklahoma doesn't win the Big 12. Well, there's still 6 at-large bids, and say they lose in the Big 12 championship game, their odds of making it are still really freaking good. But now if you go to the SEC, you're competing against the likes of Alabama, Georgia, Florida. A&M's on the rise. LSU is just 2 years removed from their national championship. We know Auburn is a team that can get to the top. I mean, you go from competing against really maybe Texas and 2 others in any given year to you're facing 6 really good teams every single season, potentially competing for that championship. Not to mention you have a team like maybe Kentucky that puts together a really good year. Or think about in 2014 when the Mississippi schools were at the top of the conference before they kind of fell off at the end of the season. So, yeah, if you're Oklahoma, if in winning championships is your goal or a secondary goal aside from money, moving doesn't make a lot of sense because you've got a really good setup in the Big 12. And here we are. We got our good pal Travis back. Did you get the Wi-Fi all settled over there, man?
Oh, he's on mute.
He's
looking
on
like
mute.
Scarface with that suit. Looking like Tony Montana. Cockroaches. Yeah,
well,
no,
Zach,
looking like he's in the Miami in the 80s.
Zach, Travis and I, we've been doing SEC Media Days kind of breakdowns each of the last 3 days. And yesterday, we kind of talked about the storyline we focused on was the potential move of OU and Texas to the SEC. From A&M's perspective, if you're A&M, Zach, do you want to see that happen? Or if you're A&M, do you stick by what Ross Bjork says and say, heck no, we want to be the only school in Texas that's in the Southeastern Conference?
Well, if you're A&M, no, you don't want that because one, recruiting, no, you no longer are able to go into a recruit's home and say, look, if you want to play SEC ball, which is the best conference in college football, the only way that you can stay in state and still do that is to come to Texas A&M. And, would that, I've been kind of getting in some discussions with a lot of Texas buddies here in the last couple of days, or at least from yesterday to today, about if all things are equal, if both A&M and Texas and Oklahoma, if all 3 of them are in the SEC, then they come at it with, well, clearly, obviously, the recruits will pick Texas over Texas A&M, or obviously they'll pick Oklahoma over Texas A&M. The only thing that's been really keeping A&M relevant in recruiting and competition these last few years is the fact that they are the only SEC school in the Lone Star State. And I think they're looking at it through the same prism or the same glasses as if A&M was still part of the Big 12 and it was that same program. It had the same facilities. It didn't have the coach who's won a national championship. It didn't have all of these other things that it has procured since entering the SEC. The A&M program that we see now is not the same one that we saw in 2011. And I don't think a lot of the Big 12 schools, or at least fans from those places, realize that. And they think, well, and they, again, come into it with kind of this air of superiority and in looking down at A&M and saying, well, the only reason grubby little Texas A&M is even in the works or in the talks right now is because they're in the SEC. Once we're there, we're just going to run things and no one won't want to go to College Station anymore. I don't think that's the thing. I think it's a culture fit for a lot of kids. Not everybody, particularly pertaining to Austin, not everybody wants to go to a big city. I know that may be hard for folks to wrap their minds around, but some kids like probably a college town where they know that they're the number one thing that's walking on the streets. Not to say that they don't treat them like that in Austin from time to time too, but it's a much larger scale, obviously. So a recruiting standpoint, A&M doesn't want it. And then from a history standpoint and knowing what it's like to work with Texas and Oklahoma and knowing what kind of problems that can bring to the power scope within the conference and how when Texas starts throwing their weight and their money around, that can really cause problems. That can cause rifts. We've seen that. It's doing it right now in the Big 12. So they know what it's like to play ball with Texas and how it doesn't always work out for the best of the conference. They can tell Greg Sankey that all they want to. They can tell the SEC that all they want to. I think what the SEC sees right now is dollar signs. That's what most of the teams are seeing in the SEC. So that's why I think it's going to end up being voted in. Again, they only need 11 of the 14 teams to vote things through. And I think that they will get that and some more because those other teams like, I don't know, the South Carolinas of the world, they don't care. They're bringing in Texas. They're bringing in Oklahoma. It beefs up how much money they're making. It beefs up the conference. It's not necessarily going to directly affect them in recruiting. What do they care if Texas and Oklahoma, the better for it? We'll get some more money out of this deal. So is it the right move for the SEC to bring these two on? From a financial standpoint, yes. From a long-term standpoint, I'm not so sure because I don't know how this is going to play out down the road. We've seen it a couple of times already where it just hasn't worked out with Texas kind of running things in a conference. So will they play nice with others is the big question.
Travis, do we have you back?
I'm back.
All right.
Back, baby.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sure y'all covered it all. So what they said.
Yeah, what they said. Well, Zach, we'll kind of move along from this because we've hit on it a lot and we'll probably be talking about it in the future. But, looking at SEC Media Days, just from home, what were some of maybe the key storylines that you saw and heard throughout the week?
Well, anytime you're going to be bringing the face of the program to SEC Media Days, I did think, and Travis and I talked about this on Chip Howard Sports Talk, I guess last week or the week before, there's only 2 players for each team that were able to come and represent for SEC because of COVID-19 protocols and everything else. And the lack of really star power at the quarterback position, I think is very, I wouldn't say telling, but it is noticeable for sure. JT Daniels, I guess, would be the biggest name coming in with Georgia. Yeah, we talked about Bryce Jones. It's Bryce Jones, the quarterback. Young. Bryce Young for Alabama. Apologize to both Bryces. But Bryce Young for Alabama coming in, and he's already been kind of given the keys to the castle, so to speak, for Nick Saban and company. But how is that going to work out? Is he going to end up being as good as he's touted to be? But yeah, there's that kind of lack of star power, especially from the quarterback position, pretty noticeable. Besides JT Daniels, maybe Matt Corral would be the next biggest name that you've got there that was present at SEC Media Days. So We'll see how it goes. I thought as far as coaches and personalities go, I mean, Mike Leach was pretty tame this year. I think everybody was expecting, okay, this is really the first SEC media days that folks get a crack at Mike Leach. He's going to get up there on the podium. He's going to be kooky. He's going to be crazy. I don't know if they necessarily got a lot of that. Eli Drinkwitz, believe it or not, is a guy that actually is pretty fun to listen to. He visited with the media today, offered some hot takes, I guess, on the whole Oklahoma and Texas possibly coming to the SEC thing. Seems like he's a pretty outspoken guy, not afraid to say some things that might get him into a little bit of hot water. So I thought, as far from a coach's standpoint, or at least being able to enjoy it or entertaining, I think Eli Drinkwitz was one of the most entertaining guys.
Eli Drinkwitz out there telling people last night and saying it again today that he's out there telling recruits that he's recruiting with both Oklahoma and Texas that, hey, look, even they're trying to join our conference. So why wouldn't you want to come, to Missouri? He's already jumping on that bandwagon quick.
Yeah. So that's the other thing I wanted to bring up. If somehow, which I everything that's pointing the direction that this in fact is going to happen, that Oklahoma and Texas are going to join the SEC. If it somehow were to fall through and it somehow were not able to happen, what kind of a blow could that give both the Longhorns and the Sooners in recruiting? Because any SEC coach could go into a recruit's home and say, look, you don't want to go there. They know where the best place to play is. It's the SEC. Come play with us. I mean, again, recruiting, I'm not an expert on that. I don't pretend to be. But it seems like that would be a big talking point. And as you said, Drinkwitz is already using it. Everybody else is going to be using it. That's in head-to-heads against Oklahoma and Texas.
Well, I think for me, I think it would be a bigger blow to Texas probably than Oklahoma, because if you're Oklahoma, you can still point to all your championships and say, well, we still win championships and we're still getting to the playoff consistently. Whereas Texas, they haven't done that much in the last decade. They're on their third coach in just several years, and that would be a tough hit for them to not be able to close the deal on this thing. So I think Oklahoma would be fine. Honestly, I think Texas would be fine. But yeah, I mean, then you would have that counterpoint, like you said, Zach, of, well, hey, they tried, but they couldn't get in, and now look where they are. And not to mention, what's the fallout one way? What's going to be the fallout of them joining the conference? But then if they don't join the conference, what's the fallout then going to be? Because Texas is making it seem like they want to explore their options. And, I guess a lot of that's lining up with the television contracts that are coming up. And, people have reported and noted those things. And so I'm curious, okay, if they don't, does that still save the Big 12 in essence, or does that just make them go to plan B per se, whether that's joining another conference or who knows, maybe even becoming an independent?